rapping on the shop front downstairs. Dave tossed the quilt up, buttoned the sheepskin he hadn't taken off for a week, and padded to the window, locked by the frost. An unconscious choreography of stiff jiggles and static bounces was being performed all the way along the road. Shoulders leapt and seized beneath ears, heads jutted forwards ahead of anticipated steps. Each graceless dancer curdled in the turning light. At least it wasn't just him. Winter had snuck up on them all, tricked by a November coppering late afternoons to make them seem longer than they were. December took a good week to creep in and then cracked an icicle whip, leaving Dave to curse the boiler he'd meant to get fixed months ago. Dave wasn't in the habit of receiving customers after lunch, and he'd hardly pulled the key out of the bottom lock when a woman strode in, backing him up the galley between the stacked furniture. First, a protruding leg table stabbed him, then recognition. He knew this face, all edges and angles, clashing with her Christmas tinkle of a voice, a contradiction that ached with familiarity. Even so, he had to scan 3 decades before he could locate it. His brother's wife, Miriam, telling him to get his sorry drunken arse off her sofa and out that house. It didn't matter what Miriam said. She could be reciting the Lord's Prayer or swearing them all blind, and it would all come out in that Christmas tinkle of a voice. Dave had trudged his festive way, coatless, half-conscious, and woken up in some Good Samaritan's car, driving him to the Royal Free, season of goodwill. He'd come the other side of the river in the new year and hadn't seen or heard from Miriam or his brother Jake since. "I'm looking for a desk," the woman said. Miriam? Dave pronounced the name as though there was something sacred in it, but either the woman hadn't heard or it meant nothing to her. The angles and edges were Miriam's, those blades slicing diagonals under her eyes, but the woman in front of him was smiling now, petal soft mouth. Not even quite a woman, a girl. Miriam? There was nothing sacred in the way she said it, tinkling hollow. Of course it wasn't Miriam. She'd be getting on for 50 now at least, and this girl... She seemed to be looking at him rather too closely, as though she was looking for something in his face, but as soon as he met this closeness, her eyes danced past him, giving a tinkling giggle as she scrunched a bobble-tipped nose. No, it wasn't Miriam. Hardly anything like. "Miriam's my mother's name," she said, a bright little blink, as though she were quite accustomed to offering this explanation. "Ooh, I like this one." She had her head between a cabinet and the underside of the French desk he couldn't get rid of. No one wanted that sort of thing anymore. Just wanted something for their little computers. No drawers, nothing. "Yes," she was saying. "This is perfect." Her mother's name. "Can you deliver it before Christmas?" Cutting it fine, I know, but I couldn't move in without a desk. I just couldn't. "I'd pay you in cash." "All goes to the government, either way." "Oh." No tinkle. Miriam's daughter, Lottie. Somehow, she'd stayed vivid, one of the few shards that flashed from so many blacked out years. Lottie, when she was 5 or so, swinging her around in their back garden, all those daisies. Trying to show her how to make chains and having to give up because all she wanted to do was pick the petals off, until Miriam came out and asked what in the Lord's name had become of Lottie's dress and hair. "It won't be till the 20th, and it's the 20th or nothing. I'm out of the country after that." That felt a little better. Yes, he was the proprietor, this was his territory, and all that was happening was that some girl was after a desk. Oh, funny time to be going away. It was not a funny time to be going away, it was the perfect time. It was dead this time of year, winter sun, doing good. 2 fingers up at the country and its carols and its cake, for a week at least. come back to the same doggy bag of merriment by then. Why had she been looking at him like that? Maybe it was Lottie. She might have recognised him. No, she couldn't. Didn't even recognise himself. It was better not to think about what Miriam might have told her about her Uncle Dave. Say who he was, and she'd be out the shop in one of those bright little blinks, leaving him stuck with the desk. Not that he really cared about the bloody desk. It was a nice little piece, though. I thought it was quite a find when he picked it up from a market near Calais. He'd have liked Lottie to have it. No, he was getting sentimental all over a bit of wood. In any case, he was done with that family. So, do you want it or not? He hadn't meant it to come out like that. He was only trying to counter the sentimental, but she flinched as though he'd taken aim. I'm sorry? The Christmas tinkle danced cold fingertips on Dave's cheek. Oh, Lottie, why had that come out so harsh? The little shudder of the petal-soft mouth that could never have been Miriam's, and now rubbing the tips of her fingers on the back of her hand the way his brother Jake used to when he was pretending not to be upset. And Jake was usually pretending not to be upset. You just jot your details down for me. Dave pulled his tissue and receipt stuffed pockets inside out, leaving himself and Lottie, no, himself and the girl, to watch his saved litter float to the ground. The girl bent down, rescuing each scrap, apologies hanging in Dave's silent, open mouth. She handed it all back to him and ran a hand over the desk, jotting down her details on her very own card, covering it with a wondrously neat hand. Christ, she could frame this, Dave said as she gave the card to him. He meant it too. He'd never seen anything quite so perfect. Could remember the warmth of Lottie's 4-day-old head in his hand. How huge it made his hand seem, and then Miriam right over him again, taking Lottie back, telling him that her skull was still in all these parts, and he wished Miriam had never agreed to let him hold her, just thinking how he might have broken her. Dave was on his best behaviour then. It was only a shame that his best behaviour meant the shakes. Miriam, in her Christmas tinkle of course, told him daily that there was no way on this god-forsaken planet they could let him stay in their house a minute longer. They did let him stay, though, for another 5 years. Right up until Miriam told Jake that she found Lottie in tears, that Dave had thrown the living room upside down and terrorised the life out of Lottie. Couldn't think where she dreamt that one up. Except those holes punched through the living room wall. Oh yes, all right, so it was all a bit of a tip, it was true, but to say he had terrorised Lottie when she was the most precious... Miss Charlotte Flower, her perfect writing on the card in his hand. No, really, Dave said. On my mother's grave, it's a work of art. She took 6 sugars in her tea, Lottie said, but knocked Dave's smile away with a soundless laugh and put her pencil back. The 20th then, she said. I suppose you'll need a deposit. Oh, don't worry about that, Dave said. She glanced at the door. Too soon, he wasn't ready for her to go. He stepped towards her, but it only moved her backwards, her soundless laugh again as she pulled her bag round in front of her. It's overpriced, Dave said. I'll knock 50 off it. 60. That's very generous. No, it isn't. I'd like to. Thank you. I mean, I want to. Dave didn't like the way her neck kept shifting, her feet too, but he couldn't let her go without saying something. He looked at her too long without managing to get a word out. She twitched back. Dave made a last-ditch effort. Was it only 6? Your grandmother only... She opened the door, stopping Dave. Nostalgia wouldn't wash, not on Miriam's daughter. My grandmother? She laughed, Miriam's Christmas tinkle. How very... Sorry. Dave pulled a scrap of tissue to blow his nose. He should have just let her go. deliver the desk on the 20th, drive off, get his winter sun. She hadn't left though. Once he could bring himself to put the comfort of his tissue back in his pocket, he looked up to see the shy petals of Lottie's mouth folding. Sorry, that must have seemed a bit... I'll say it did. She's been dead 10 years. Her tinkle of a laugh wasn't the cruelty of a hollow Christmas. It was the lightness of 4 or 5-year-old Lottie in the back garden in her mucky dress, her hair a mess, learning how to make daisy chains. I suppose you inquire after all your customers' families, do you? Not all, just... How is Miriam? And Jake? Dad's... Look, this is... You do remember me? I have to go. Don't worry about the desk. I don't want it. She was outside now and Dave was trying to catch her up. But you can't move in without a desk! People were looking. People that she was sliding past. He knew he should have just left it. Charlotte Flower. You can't tell where a person's memory starts. Dave started early enough. It was the blank spaces between the beginning and the point he'd somehow got to despite all the odds that were the problem. But he remembered Lottie, and she remembered him. Must have. His mother, her grandmother, 6 sugars, sometimes 7, didn't realise it had been Lottie who'd taken the edge off sobriety until he left. The 20th was a week away. He'd deliver the desk. He wouldn't say anything, leave the poor girl alone. Let her have the desk and get himself some winter sun. Maybe he should call Jake. No, leave him alone, leave Lottie alone. They were done with him, so he was done with them. Tidy things up here and go for a pint. He deserved it after all that. Dave? No Christmas tinkle. Just a girl after a desk inside the door he hadn't locked. Lottie? No one calls me Lottie anymore. Sorry. No, it's okay. Look, the thing is, she was rubbing her fingers against the back of her hand, trying to smile, petals folding. Dave waited for Miriam's Christmas tinkle. Hoped for it almost, just so that whatever she said next didn't matter. But there was no Christmas tinkle. This was Lottie, not Miriam, and she was looking at him, eyes bright, but without their blink. And whatever it was she saw, whatever it was she was getting ready to say, did matter. Thing is, I really would like the desk.